Feast on Kentucky. We discuss with Caleb Calhoun right now on Off the Hook Sports. Well, Caleb, here we go. Tennessee beats Kentucky handily, and it was as much the defense as the offense. So let's dive right into it. Your early reaction to the game that was never, ever in doubt. It felt more like UT Martin than it did Florida or any other game that Tennessee's played this season. It just felt like there was a huge difference in coaching, in ability, in talent. It looked like a Kentucky back in the 90s and 2000s.
No, it did, and it's funny, if you go back and look at the game, I think Tennessee left a few points on the board, honestly. There's a real good chance if it weren't for a few miscues in Kentucky territory, they could have gotten into the 60 range again. Yeah, they just flat out dominated. I think the way the defense played, I'm retracting everything I have said. I was a bel I mean, no, I
But
honestly,
see, I love that about you because I hate the people that paint themselves into a corner and then just keep throwing punches. And hey, I was down on this secondary too. I was down on the linebacker. So you go ahead. Sorry to interrupt, but I know where you're going because I've gotten to know
oh,
you.
yeah. Well, I'm actually starting with, yeah, I was down on the secondary. I did think that the secondary, I'll say this much. I actually thought they had a bit of an advantage in this game relative to other games because if you really followed Will Levis, it wasn't just the secondary getting healthy again, McCullough coming back, and because three guy, Kamal Hadden and Christian Charles weren't, didn't stand out in the secondary, but they were obviously healthy, and then Jalen McCullough coming back, he actually was pretty crucial pretty early on. So there was that, but there was also the fact that Will Levis relies on lots of plays over the top to
Mm-hmm.
try when throwing the ball. And what I kind of had said was that say what you want about Tennessee secondary going into this game, but they didn't give up a lot of big plays over the top. They kept everything in front of them for most of the time for most of the year. And so I thought Will Levis was gonna be forced to keep things in front of them, but that he'd be effective moving the ball. He wasn't. And where I'm retracting is I'm retracting every bit of belief I had in Will Levis after this game. Like Tennessee secondary forced him to try to move the ball underneath, and he really just struggled severely doing that. And it wasn't just the interception; some of his decision making was just awful. And
What I notice is when announcers talk most about how tough you are at the quarterback position, it usually means there are some deficiencies in your game otherwise.
yes, exactly. There are exceptions to rules in football with quarterbacks. Drew, and you're right. Toughness is one of those exceptions where the rule with quarterbacks is you're right. Toughness is not really a prerequisite for being in the NFL. No one really called like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady tough. They're tough quarterbacks. The only exception to that rule was Brett Favre, and we probably shouldn't be talking about him because he doesn't have the best track record on going for him right now. But uh, and maybe Ben Roethlisberger too, I guess, would be the other one. But yeah, we usually don't talk about toughness when talking about elite quarterbacks, and that's what they were talking about with Will Levis tonight. And I couldn't put it on his offensive line. I'm not saying they were good. The offensive line was not good. The pass rush for Tennessee definitely got to him in the second half when there were obvious passing downs. But I would say those interceptions were much more on him than they were on the offensive line, and also Tennessee secondary for making plays. I mean, that Jawan Mitchell interception was all because of Danico Slaughter laying that hit. Very much reminded me of, I'm going to do a throwback, see if anybody remembers this in the chat board, a 2003 Jabril Wilson hit on Kentucky. It was like as the game was winding down.
Ooh, I don't remember that, and I was there. I'd have to go back and look that up. I do. My memory from Jabril Wilson is two things. One, how nervous he was when they threw him in front of the media. He was a mid-season transfer from junior college. And the other, I asked Larry Slade. I said, "What's so good about him?" And he said, "Really? he's always around the ball. I was like, okay, sometimes we make it too complicated as reporters.
Yeah.
And he was. And this secondary too, you know, they made plays, they intercepted passes, but the defensive front to me is just it's gone from I thought it would be slightly above average to I can't say team strengths because they're so good on offense, but it has gone to me to something that's pretty darn special up front. And I think a lot of it's coaching. I think you should be really excited to have coordinator Tim Banks as your guy because I'll be honest with you, Caleb. I think they're getting, and I don't mean this to sound like a slight on any of their talent, because I think Byron Young and a lot of those guys are talented. I love Joshua Joseph's upside. Deron Terry is really turning it up. But the bottom line is he is maximizing what those guys can do. I don't,
Oh,
I don't know that they could do any better under any other type of system.
I totally agree. And I think one of the biggest coups was getting Rodney Garner to come up and coach the defensive line this year. He's getting the most out of him too. As you probably know, Rodney Garner really put together that defensive line in 1998. He wasn't on the 98 team, but he was on the staff before then that put them together. And that was a huge get by Josh Heupel. I agree. I think that, I mean, they really are maximizing what they can do. I didn't see DeJoun Terry doing what he did in this game at all. I didn't see that coming out of him. I thought, I thought more of, I did think highly of Amari Thomas, Byron Young, and Tyler Barron. And so I thought those guys had raw talent, but you're right. It's the whole unit. And we can't say enough about them. There was only one drive, and it was Kentucky's touchdown drive. So, I mean, you don't really have to be, that it's not that obscure. It was their one touchdown drive where they ran the ball well. Outside of that one drive, I think Chris Rodriguez was pretty much shut down the whole game, wasn't he?
Yeah, I got the feeling he was pretty done. I got the feeling that Kentucky started pulling guys early, like late third quarter, early fourth quarter. Like, yeah, let's try to make a run here to a respectable bowl game. That to me seemed pretty significant, and he was one of those guys that I thought went out early. I'll tell you the other thing that the announcers brought up, and we want to get your thoughts on the message board. Tell us who you think stood out the most, who is the MVP, and maybe we'll send them a Hendon Hooker jersey or a T-shirt. But not that they would wear it, but we might send them one. So, but Caleb, I thought it was really interesting. I've said this before. So the announcers tend to visit with the coaches the Friday before a game. And they brought up when they were looking for stuff to talk about the Stoops connection. And I didn't think about that really going in. Big Ronnie says Byron Young should be the MVP. I didn't think about that going in, but I think there was a little bit of let's lay it on a Stoops with Josh Heupel after the way things went down at Oklahoma because
I mean,
you didn't need that Jabari Small touchdown at the end.
that's where I was going. Yes, that touchdown pass to Jabari Small was definitely kind of reminded me of. It was very reminiscent of in 2008. I want to say when Urban Meyer took a timeout to throw a late touchdown against Georgia, and that was the year after Georgia won, where Mark Richt had everybody go celebrate and take the unsportsmanlike conduct penalties in the end zone. And yes, I definitely think that was a laid on the Stoops, and particularly since Mike Stoops is on that staff. And remember, Josh Heupel was scapegoated because Bob Stoops needed a scapegoat and didn't want to fire his brother. And so,
Right.
and also again, there. I mean, just I've talked about this offense that Josh Heupel runs. Bob Stoops tried to get him to veer, no pun intended, veer away from that offense and go more towards the zone read, and then fire him because the zone read that Bob Stoops forced on him wasn't working.
Do me a favor if you're out there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that share button. I would greatly appreciate it because we've got some big things coming down the pike. Maybe not as big as Tennessee being the number one team in the nation, which Kirk Herbstreit said they would be when the college football playoff comes out on Tuesday, the first one. But we've got some big things coming down the pike. So please like, subscribe, and share. Only about 20% of our viewers have actually subscribed to the channel. So we would greatly appreciate you doing that right now. And I won't I won't completely blow you up with it. Big Ronnie, thanks for sharing it to Vol Nation. We appreciate that. We're going to hang with you and break down the game. Okay, so we can't say anything about Hendon Hooker that we haven't said already, right? I disagree. I love you. You're better at history than me. I mean, you know more about some of the games that I actually covered. I think my strength is X's and O's, and I saw a couple of times Hendon Hooker look off a safety, and I don't think that I have seen that in his play at all, ever. I don't think he's been that comfortable. I thought on one of the early touchdowns, he looked off a safety. He was incredibly comfortable running the option. He knew to keep when Kentucky was absolutely going to take away the pitch because they'd ran that before with Dylan Sampson. And to me, he is even more decisive when he runs the ball. And I think Hendon Hooker was markedly better against Kentucky than it's hard to say with some of the stats he's put up, but I think he continues to improve and get better. There is no question in my mind.
Oh, absolutely. I said earlier this week that this was going to be a test for Hendon Hooker because Kentucky doesn't really let you live and die with your threat of the run game. Although Hooker still ran it a few times in this game, but he was going to be forced to stand in the pocket more and make some throws against a pretty elite secondary. And you're right, he did it. I mean, both touchdown passes to Jalen Hyatt, he looked off. I don't know if it was this. Well, he looked off Carrington. Oh, I'm forgetting Carrington's last name now. Oh my gosh, for Kentucky, but the defensive back for Kentucky is Carrington Valentine, I think. He looked him off, I think, both times. And then, of course, one time, I think Kentucky decided, let's have a linebacker on Jalen Hyatt, which I don't know. I don't know what they were smoking. I thought Mark Stoops was a good coach on defense, but, those were both great plays by Hendon Hooker. He still has he's a little bit quick to still kind of take off when things break down. But I mean, I can't really knock that. Every time he's done it, it's worked. It's not like when he takes off, it doesn't work. So
yeah, I think he's really good at that. I thought that, I wrote a lot about Alabama for Saturday Down South last year, and I thought there were times where Bryce Young kept his eyes downfield too long that he probably should have just run and pick up 20 or so yards. And I think we're seeing Hendon Hooker do that when it's there. He's going after it. I think that's been really impressive. Stephanie says, "Let's go, Vols." I'm pumped. If this is your first time being on the chat board or being a part of it, we broadcast live each and every weekday at 8:30. So don't let me forget this, Caleb, because I forgot my notepad in the other room. But I'm going to get to the reasons why Tennessee will beat Kentucky or will beat Georgia. They have beat Kentucky. So if you're just joining us, I will get to that. Hang with me, like, subscribe, and share. Let me go ahead and tell you, though, that it is now, as crazy as it sounds, Hendon Hooker's Heisman Trophy to lose. It is his to lose. He's been the favorite in two sports books that popped up on Saturday as the new favorite above C.J. Stroud of Ohio State. And I said this in reference to Hooker, and I think I was incorrect, Caleb. I said you don't win the Heisman Trophy in September or even October. But, buddy, we're coming up on November. And it's going to be November before Tennessee plays Georgia. And Hendon Hooker is going to be the leader, I believe, by several sports books. Already two that I have seen. And there's no question in my mind, barring some sort of injury or something unforeseen or a suspension, which isn't going to happen because he's a great kid. He's going to be in New York, and he's going to go in as the favorite to win the Heisman.
yeah, I think so too. And also, I think part of that is because of, let's be honest. I mean, I don't know if you watched any of the Ohio State Penn State game today, but
I did a lot, actually. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I did too. And I mean, yeah, CJ Stroud kind of came through with a couple of plays in the fourth quarter, and I'm not going to knock that for him, but it was really Travion Henderson and that defense that won it for Penn State. I know CJ Stroud threw for over 300 yards, did what he was supposed to do, but let's be honest. I mean, I don't think he had his moment that Hendon Hooker had against Alabama or LSU or Florida or even Pittsburgh for that matter. And so when we were talking about what Ohio State did in this game, we're talking about Travion Henderson more than CJ Stroud. You're not really doing that with Hendon Hooker. So I agree. I really think that's where they both played ranked teams today. And even though Stroud technically had a better stat line, he was 26 of 33 for 354 yards. We're not talking about him as much as we are somebody else really stepping up in the fourth quarter. And so I'm with you. I think Hooker's the Heisman favorite. I also think, and I'm not just saying this because I want a 2-versus-1 matchup, which I do want a 2-versus-1 matchup. What college football fan doesn't like that in the regular season?
I'm with you.
But I mean, I'm sorry. If you watch Ohio State and Tennessee play today, I don't see how you could not objectively move Tennessee up to number 2 ahead of Ohio State, honestly.
I agree. Kirk Herbstreit during the broadcast, and I usually turn it down because I'll subconsciously steal something in my writing that they say. But I saw where he had number 1, and I turned it on. So Tennessee could be number 1 in the polls that come out on Tuesday. And then the comparisons back to this 98 team, that was the first team I covered. So, and I remember distinctly there being this feeling that these guys are going to blow it. I mean, I do. I mean, I hate to sound really weird about that, but I was talking to Josh Ward about it, who is also on our YouTube channel. Please like, subscribe, and share. And he didn't really remember it that way because he wasn't covering it full time. He's younger than I am. But I remember just the feeling around not the team necessarily, but the community that team was going to blow it. I feel the exact opposite about this team. I feel like they are the team that comes out of nowhere, and there might not be an elite team, or they're it. And I think they have every opportunity to win the college football playoff and a national championship. After what I saw today, am I crazy to say that?
No, I mean they flipped the script today. This was not their typical style of play, how they won. I mean, they had a drive. They had a 15-play drive, their second touchdown drive. Josh Heupel doesn't do 15-play drives if he can help it. And that was really where I saw a complete performance. And you're right. I think what stands out to me the most is I'm sorry, I've had a stat line up and something was going. What stands out to me the most about Heupel about this performance was there was no there haven't been any mental lapses of nervousness or looking ahead in any game they've played this year. I thought when one of the things you bring up with the 98 game, the first time they were number 1, that was the Arkansas game. That was the first week ever they were number 1 in like 40 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they clearly weren't ready for the moment. I mean, they won that game, but they weren't ready for the moment of being number 1 facing a top 10 team because they spotted Arkansas 21-3 lead. And so
one quick Clint Sterner story for you. I bumped into him at a bar in Fayetteville many years later, whenever Tennessee played Arkansas there. And the first thing that blurted out of my mouth when I shook his hand, because he played for the Cowboys, so I knew what he looked like. He had the long hair back then. And I said to him, the only place that you're more popular than Fayetteville is Knoxville.
oh my God.
And that did not go over well, and I was asked to leave the VIP area. So that was the end.
Oh my gosh.
It just you'll find that stuff just blurts out of my mouth. So I feel bad about that. But
he was the only reason they were in that game, though. Because he played phenomenal.
Well, and if you remember, they shouldn't have even they shouldn't have run play action. They should have just run the football. I mean, there was only like 2 minutes left. But nevertheless, Billy Ratliff was the hero of that day. You're absolutely right. Hit a gold mine with Heupel. I agree, Mr. Zip. You nailed that on the head. No question about it. And this Tennessee football team, like I said, continues to get better. So I want to go through the reasons, unless you've got something else you want to add, of why Tennessee will beat Georgia, which will probably be the number 1 team in the nation. Do you want to go through that? Do you have anything you want to say about this game, or do you mean throw that at you? And you tell me if I'm crazy.
I think we pretty much covered the bases of this game. Jalen Hyatt, breaking Marcus Nash's school record for most touchdown receptions in a season. Got 14 today.
In October.
Yeah, in October.
Yeah, you keep waiting for somebody to, and I thought they did a really good job. I think the TV people have figured out how they put a safety in a bind there, and I thought there were some good shots of the safety. It's never a good sign for your football team when your safety has an ISO cam on them, because that's what they
Yes.
did to show how they would catch them in the middle between the wheel route and between just a straight up fly route. So go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, and share button. And here are my 3 reasons why Tennessee will beat Georgia on Saturday. It is on offthehooksports.com if you want to check it out. I'm going to go with Georgia isn't very mature. And you can use whatever word you want to there if you want to replace it. Poised, whatever. But that's the word I came up with, because that group last year was driven to win a national championship, even after losing to Alabama. And Caleb, this team doesn't feel like that. They've been average against Kent State, Missouri. They played well in the Oregon game, but it's up and down and up and down. And Tennessee could very well get them on a down day. Even if they don't, I like Tennessee's chances. I just don't think it's a very driven team like they had last year. Rosters change. Teams aren't the same year to year.
No, they're not, and you see this a lot of times. It kind of strikes me as 2013 Alabama a little bit. This Georgia team,
Mm-hmm.
and that game that Auburn, the kick six, the greatest SEC football game I ever watched, when Auburn beat Alabama off the kick six. I thought that that Alabama team was playing with fire all year. They were just kind of bored and going through the motions. I'm with you. I'm seeing it with Georgia. Even if you want to say that, even if you want to say they're going to be up for the big games and Tennessee's now a big game, okay, you can say that, but I do believe in college football, if the more bad habits you pick up, not taking other games seriously, that does come back to bite you at some point, because they're going to seep through in a game where you need them. And that's exactly what happened with Alabama in that game
Yep.
against Auburn in 2013. And I know it was Cade Foster and missing all those field goals, but I just think that I could easily see that happening to Georgia. I think where they should be really scared is, again, Hendon Hooker showing he could throw from the pocket the way he did in this game against Kentucky. We know about Tennessee's offensive line. Alabama has a better pass rush than Georgia, and Tennessee manhandled Alabama's pass rush. And so, I mean, I could. There's a really good case that Tennessee is going to beat Georgia. So now the question is, can Tennessee establish the run game the way they should? And Georgia's secondary should be elite. So we're going to have to see how that goes and what Stetson Bennett going to do to them on the other side, because he is still a good quarterback.
A couple of other reasons that I put together quickly, because I wanted to get them out there. My thoughts, you can go to offthehooksports.com. Pretty short read, but I think it's pretty pertinent now. Georgia doesn't contain the opposing quarterback. Anthony Richardson, we talked so much about gap assignments and containment earlier this year when Tennessee played LSU and Jaden Daniels, and they played Florida, Anthony Richardson. Georgia doesn't do that well. And we just talked about Hendon Hooker can move around. I would not be surprised if he had one of his better days running the football. And I think we all kind of hold our breath when he runs the football, because he's so important to this team and this program. And he's such a good kid. But I say kid, he's 24. But to me, Richardson had a lot of rushing lanes, took advantage of it a couple of times. I don't think they're very good there at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point to bring up about them. And Georgia is going to be a game where I've been like, protect Hooker, protect Hooker. Georgia is going to be one of those games where you turn Hendon Hooker loose. I mean, I just think you have to turn him loose. You have to do what you can to win, because the whole college football playoff rides on this. And so I think Josh Heupel is going to turn him loose because of that. And when I say the whole college football playoff, is Tennessee beats Georgia after tonight, you were right. I was wrong. I don't see them losing to South Carolina. I don't see South Carolina as a threat to them anymore. So if they beat Georgia, they're going undefeated. If they go undefeated, if they lose to Alabama in the SEC title game and Alabama wins out, Tennessee's going to the college football playoff. That's just happening.
Yeah, the only scenario, and I go back again on our YouTube page. John Adams said of the Knoxville News Sentinel, USA Today Network, he said he thinks that they beat Georgia and they beat Alabama for a second time. And John, I think you would agree, is probably viewed as one of the more negative or cynical writers out there. And I think it's doable. I mean, I don't think you ever want to face Nick Saban twice. but it's doable. The only scenario, if things play out by beating South Carolina and beating the teams they should on their schedule, the only way it plays out where I think they don't get in, because I think the three of the four best teams are in the SEC.
I agree.
There's no question in my mind. So the only way it plays out is if Georgia beats Tennessee and then Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC championship game. And then you have Alabama and Georgia go in and Tennessee at 5. And that would be a heartbreaking thing to happen. But the Vols control that and what they do on Saturday.
They do. They do. I also think they are playing with, and this is a big one. I think there's so many veterans on this team. They're playing with a sense of urgency because I think a lot of programs, when they're like ahead of schedule in their second year, they think, oh, we're a rising program. We may not make it this year, but we're going to get there next year. And I don't see that. One, a lot of these guys are like 24 and in their 6th year of eligibility, like Hendon Hooker. So this is it for them. But also, I think there's kind of an understanding, particularly from Josh Heupel on down, that like, I don't care how good you are in the future. Nick Saban's a rarity. These opportunities don't come every year to be in the college football race. They just don't. And I don't care how elite of a program you are. It's like the NFL, Dan Marino goes to the Super Bowl the second year and everybody's like, oh, he's going to have plenty of other chances to win. No, never went back. Never even got close. And so,
you're completely right. And the same thing, correct me if I'm wrong, happened in Oklahoma in the second year under Bob Stoops. Didn't you think at that point that he's going to run 3 or 4 championships off? I did.
Yeah, I did too. And him and Jim Tressel too. Second year at Ohio State, Jim Tressel.
Great sweater vest as well.
Yes.
Do want to take a second before I get to my last reason why Tennessee will beat Georgia, and that is just prayers to Derek Dooley and the entire Dooley family about the passing of Vince Dooley. I can tell you that he was one of the true gentlemen out there. I hate to tell you, but a lot of coaches don't really care about the fans out there. I'd say 90%, and a lot of them aren't great people as you would like to think. He was one of those guys that was incredibly humble and just was incredibly great man, and you could just tell he kind of had that Pat Summitt presence, so to speak. When he was there, you knew he was there. So God bless to the Georgia family for that. I do want to get though to my last reason why Tennessee will beat Georgia. Georgia doesn't have a great quarterback. I'm sorry. You can have this discussion if you want to in the preseason. He's better. Stetson Bennett's better than you thought he would be. But the bottom line is he was a caretaker last year. He threw 2 interceptions today, one into coverage that was just a bad throw. It's a great story. Listen, if somebody called me at a publishing company, you'd probably do this too and said, will you write the Stetson Bennett book? He's going to give you full access. I would love to write that book because it's a good story, but he's not a good quarterback.
Yeah, he's not. I would have thought he was about like 5 weeks ago, but I'm just not seeing the same Stetson Bennett recently, and I don't know what's going on. It's kind of funny you say that because what you just said about Stetson Bennett is how. Okay, I'm going to be blasphemous here because I think we all love him, and I think he's just a great guy, all-around great guy, but it's kind of like the T. Martin effect. T. Martin was a great story. I mean, just you could not have asked for a better story than T. Martin. Staying at Tennessee when he could have transferred, and then stepping in, winning a national championship, replacing Peyton. Just an amazing story. But then his senior year happened, and there was no development from his junior year whatsoever, at all. And then he goes to the NFL and he flames out, and you realize he just wasn't. He was a solid quarterback for Tennessee, for a loaded Tennessee team in '98. And I'm seeing that with I get T. Martin vibes with Stetson Bennett. It's a similar story. You're right. Great, wins national championship, no real development.
I wouldn't have thought about that, but that's a great comparison. I mean, I love T to death. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a great person. I like him on an individual level. I think he was exactly what they needed. I think they rallied around him. But the bottom line is he had limitations in his game. And Stetson Bennett has limitations in his game. So last year when you had 18 players starting at the same time on Georgia's defense that were going to go into the first round of the NFL or however many it was. That's all he had to do is just be a caretaker. But that's not the case this year. He has to make more plays, and I just don't think he's going to. I don't see how, after watching the two teams today, how Georgia can keep up with Tennessee as far as scoring. I just don't. I can't possibly imagine it. I know it's in Athens, but Caleb, tell me how that happens.
Yeah, I don't either. And I mean, let's not forget Stetson Bennett coming into this game. I mean, he was the ultimate take the safe route quarterback. I mean, he has I think he had 7 touchdowns, 1 interception coming into this game. He now has 3 interceptions on the year. But that's a pretty weird ratio to have this late in the season for a quarterback that's supposed to be so great. And and he's averaging like 8 yards or something an attempt, which isn't bad. But, when you're talking about Hendon Hooker averaging, 12 yards an attempt, like an insane number. Yeah, I don't see – I agree. I don't see any way they keep up in that on that level. Like, there's a lot of other ways Georgia can win, obviously. But you're right. But I do want to get to Hooker for a minute because I thought about this. It's like, have you ever seen a quarterback have so few interceptions, but also average so many yards per attempt? Those usually don't go hand in hand.
No.
Hendon Hooker is lapping the field. He leads everybody in yards per attempt this year by a long shot.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I know I haven't seen anything like that. Please subscribe, and share. Go to offthehooksports.com. We already have 3 stories up. So they were toying around with what the line might be. I'm going to say it's less than 10. Bear or whoever it is that they go to. And I think he said as of Friday it was going to be about 12 and a half. I don't think that. Listen, if it's 12 and a half, then take Tennessee. And I don't give out gambling advice because I'm horrible at it. Caleb, you're better. If that's 12
I had a horrible 3 weeks, though. It's been a miserable 3 weeks.
Maybe I'm bad luck. If that's 12 and a half, don't you take Tennessee?
Yeah, I take Tennessee at 12 and a half. I take Tennessee at 12 and a half. That's the height of disrespect. That is the exact same as the 18-point underdog line with Tennessee, Florida in 01, where they're going off history. They're going off history to a certain degree, which is in 01, it was like Tennessee doesn't win in the swamp. They haven't won in 30 years. Let's just throw some points back at the line. This 12-point line would be it's in the back. It's just the back of Vegas, the back of the odds makers' minds. It's still Tennessee. When are they going to wake up? And I mean, I'm sorry. At this point, I thought they could have. There was an off chance they could have gotten upset by Kentucky, and then the year kind of derails after that. Still, and then the Alabama win is the peak moment of a year that because that happens a lot of times with teams that get real hot in October. The way they played against Kentucky, newsflash, guys, they're not going to wake up. That doesn't mean they're going to make the college football playoff for sure, but this isn't a team that reality is going to all of a sudden set in that they're not that good. That's not happening anymore.
No. Vols Time says Tennessee and Georgia game is all you'll hear this week. It will be great for the Vols in recruiting. It absolutely will be. Please hit that like, subscribe, and share button because we'll be and get your notifications on, please. I'm begging you because we will be on with you each and every weekday at 8:30 with Caleb. We'll be on with you with Ron Slay. Amanda LaFrada is incredible. She called Tennessee to beat Georgia. I didn't think that would happen at the time. I do now. So the loser of that has to jump in Norris Lake in November. So it's looking like me. And also Jonathan Crompton joins us weekly. So we've got, and Chris Landry gives us great breakdowns. So hit that like, subscribe, share button and turn the notifications on. Caleb, I look at Tennessee, and the thing that I will say that is their greatest strength, more than their quarterback, more than their receivers, more than their defense tonight, it is their maturity level, their focus. When people were saying this could be a classic sandwich game because they're thinking about Georgia next week, I never even considered that. I never, ever, ever considered that. And part of that's probably from talking to Cooper Mays and Jacob Warren on Sundays, as we'll do on Sunday, and getting just the feel of it, of being around those guys and seeing how this team has responded. As far as a mental letdown, I'll go ahead and tell you, that ain't happening. They might get beat, They might go out there and have 5 turnovers one game and get beat. But Caleb, I don't think a mental letdown is going to happen against Georgia or a lesser opponent like a South Carolina. I don't think the stage is going to be too big in the SEC championship game or a playoff. I think the greatest thing that this team has is their mental strength. I really believe.
Yes, and they're poised. I mean, think about there was a story.
Great work. Great work.
Yeah, and the story about Hendon Hooker on TV today, where that he did lose the starting job last year to Joe Milton. Joe Milton's a year younger than him. Like that's you wouldn't even blame him. Every quarterback in the world will go transfer. And here's Hendon Hooker betting on himself, saying, "No, I'm going to win this job back." And I'm thinking, like, people don't do that. I think, I think back to another history lesson for people, but a recruiting battle in 2003. Dave, you were probably knee deep in it. Remember when Brian Brom was looking at Tennessee heavily? The quarterback that played at Louisville. And he was more talented than Eric Ainge, but it just seemed like Eric Ainge wasn't running from a quarterback competition that was going to happen. And Brom went to Louisville because he wanted to be the guaranteed starter. And I'm like, that a quarterback that does that, the quarterback that embraces the competition is the more likely one that you're going to trust in really tense moments. And Hendon Hooker did that. And I think that type of leadership is huge. I also want to point out, given what Jimbo Fisher said earlier this week, I don't know if you know, but I think this is a big problem for Tennessee winning and being 8-0 because they're just not going to recruit as well anymore because they can't sell playing time.
That's right. That's right. I didn't hear that line, but I heard word of it. And yes, no, yeah, it's a funny thing about it. They are, and you wrote a great column about it earlier this week. I think it was this week about how suddenly you have Squirrel White to be the slot receiver with a lot of time under his belt, which you didn't have with Velus Jones. You didn't have now with Jalen Hyatt. They had to kind of learn on the fly. He had a year with Hyatt, but how good can that guy be? He's not as physically imposing, but I think he's going to be fantastic. Again, turn those notifications on. We're with you each and every weekday morning at 8:30. Mr. Zip says, everyone ready for Georgia? I'll tell you who's ready for Georgia, this Tennessee football team. They'll play well. They'll make you proud. I'm not going to guarantee a win, but I think they'll win, and I know that they'll play well. I can guarantee you that. So have a fantastic evening, day whenever you're watching this. Caleb, great stuff. OffTheHookSports.com. This has been a presentation of Off the